Set in Russia in May 1942, at the height of the Second World War, Soviet forces were struggling fiercely against German attacks. In the eastern region, German troops were continuously bombarded day and night by the Allied forces. Meanwhile, in the western region, the city of Leningrad was under siege, and Soviet soldiers continued to defend their positions. Far behind the Soviet defensive lines, there was a small village called Vascov that appeared calm and far removed from the turmoil of war. In that village, the residents continued their daily lives as usual, working in the fields and preparing food. The place was also often used as a stopover point, as well as a secret headquarters for a Soviet anti-aircraft unit. One day, a group of Soviet soldiers arrived, and the village women welcomed them warmly. The soldiers then ate together, celebrated, and drank until late. However, the situation changed when one drunken soldier became jealous because his friend was flirting with a woman he liked. A dispute then occurred. One of the village women immediately called Lieutenant Vascov to calm the situation. Unfortunately, Vascov had difficulty controlling his own subordinates, and as a result, Vascov eventually received a reprimand from his superior. Vascov admitted that Vascov was no longer able to discipline those soldiers. Vascov then requested that more stable troops who did not have a habit of drinking be sent. The request was approved, and the problematic soldiers were transferred elsewhere. Now Vascov had to stand guard alone in the village. After waiting for 2 days, a village woman informed Vascov that the replacement troops had arrived. Vascov immediately went to greet them, and Vascov was surprised to learn that the entire unit consisted of female soldiers. Although surprised, Vascov understood that these were the troops that had been promised, namely, soldiers who did not drink alcohol and did not cause trouble. Vascov then ordered them to build their headquarters in a wooden warehouse. His attention was briefly drawn to a quiet female soldier named Liza. He asked about her background, and Liza explained that she came from a rural area in Siberia. That answer impressed Vascov because the place was very far away. Not long afterward, a senior soldier named Nova asked about the toilet facilities. However, there was no toilet available at that location, so they had to build one first. Vascov then left with a village woman to discuss the matter, while the female soldiers began to observe Vascov and secretly became interested in him. On the other hand, Liza was often seen keeping to herself while remembering her difficult childhood. The story then shifts to Liza's past when she moved from place to place in rural Siberia with her frequently ill mother. During the period of forced labor policies under the Soviet government, their lives were very difficult. When Liza grew older, her parents took her to move to eastern Siberia. There, her father often took her hunting in the forest, while also teaching her how to understand the terrain and how to survive. One day, her father invited a friend named Guest to join the hunt. Liza appeared to pay special attention to him. At night, when Guest was alone at the inn, Liza suddenly came and tried to seduce him. Guest was surprised and explained that Guest had come at Liza's father's invitation to help watch over and educate her. He then refused Liza's invitation. Hearing the rejection, Liza felt disappointed and left in anger. The story then returns to the present. While the other soldiers were asleep, a female soldier named Rita secretly went to the city to visit her child. It is known that Rita left her young son in the care of her mother while Rita carried out her military duties. The next morning, Vascov became angry when he saw the female soldiers wandering around without permission. Vascov was also confused because several of them had not gathered to line up. When he checked the yard of the warehouse, he found many pieces of underwear hanging, and it turned out the soldiers were bathing inside. Vascov felt embarrassed because he had entered unintentionally. Nova then explained that they had turned the place into a barracks as well as a temporary toilet area. In a firm tone, Vascov ordered them to obey the rules and not act as they pleased. In a state of frustration, Vascov then continued his work cutting wood. While working, he remembered his harsh past, experiences that shaped him into a rigid and highly disciplined person. In the past, at the age of 32, Vascov married and was blessed with a baby boy. Not long afterward, he became involved in the Winter War in the Sordavala region. In December 1939, Vascov was injured by a bomb explosion and had to undergo treatment in the hospital. During his recovery, he received the bad news that his wife had an affair and left with another man. Vascov eventually divorced her, while his son was placed in an orphanage. A year later, the child whom Vascov loved dearly passed away. That series of events shaped Vascov's personality into someone harsh and very principled. Until now, he has been known as a firm leader who does not tolerate even the smallest mistake. Returning to the present, Vascov carried out his duties as usual. Suddenly, the female soldiers rang the emergency bell because a German aircraft was seen approaching. They immediately gathered and tried to target the aircraft using their combat equipment. Shot after shot was fired, but many missed. The German aircraft then returned fire, causing several female soldiers to fall on the spot. Vascov arrived late at the location and immediately evacuated the wounded. Meanwhile, the other female soldiers continued the resistance until they finally succeeded in shooting down the aircraft. The German pilot jumped out using a parachute. When the women were about to shoot him, Vascov tried to stop them because the pilot could be used as a source of information. However, because their emotions had already reached a peak, they continued shooting until he died. The incident made Vascov very angry, and Vascov threatened to impose punishment on them. Vascov's harsh words made Rita remember her past. In 1941, Rita followed her husband, who was assigned to guard a village. Her husband was a soldier, and they lived together in that village until they had a child. Several months after Rita gave birth, German forces suddenly attacked with great strength. Thousands of German soldiers entered the village, destroying houses and massacring the residents without mercy. Rita was seen trying to escape while carrying her child. On the other side, her husband fought with all his strength until he was eventually killed by a bomb explosion. Rita could only cry as she witnessed the event, but she still had to save herself and her child. Returning to the present, Vascov's superior arrived bringing 3 additional female soldiers. He then inspected the condition of the unit, and Vascov reported that they had worked well. The superior then called Rita specifically and asked her to look after the 3 new soldiers because they came from wealthy and influential families. It was known that the 3 of them were undergoing military education and needed a place for field practice. According to the superior, this location was the safest for them. Rita then met them to introduce herself. The soldier standing on the left was named Zhenya, then Galia, and the last was Sonia. The story then shifts to Zhenya's past. Zhenya was the daughter of a high-ranking Soviet military officer who had just moved to Moscow. One day, her father introduced Zhenya to his colleague named Colonel Lugin, and in a short time, the two became attracted to each other. Zhenya's mother once reminded her that Lugin already had a wife, but Zhenya ignored it. Their relationship continued until they eventually entered a serious relationship and married. Returning to the present, Vascov gathered all the female soldiers and congratulated them on their success in intercepting the enemy aircraft. As a reward, Vascov gave them some freedom to rest. The women then used that time to build a simple sauna and bathe together. After finishing bathing, the soldiers began to tidy themselves. Zhenya then apologized to Liza because earlier she had only been joking about Vascov. Rita had previously mentioned that Liza had feelings for Vascov. However, the conversation instead made Liza the subject of teasing because several friends said that in fact many women were also attracted to Vascov. Seeing the situation, Rita immediately defended Liza and emphasized that feelings of love were not something appropriate to be made into a joke. Her words made the debate among them grow even more heated. Fortunately, Zhenya wisely tried to calm the situation by starting to sing. Her melodious voice made everyone fall silent and become captivated. After the song ended, Zhenya suddenly looked sad and chose to be alone. Her friends immediately asked what had happened. Zhenya then explained that the song reminded her of a painful past. The scene then shifts to a flashback in the city of Tallinn in August 1941. At that time, Zhenya's entire family was kidnapped by Nazi forces because they were suspected of having connections with high-ranking Soviet military officials. Zhenya herself was successfully hidden by local residents around the area and survived. However, she had to directly witness the massacre carried out by the enemy forces. All members of her family were killed in that incident. After managing to escape, Zhenya went to the Soviet headquarters where her husband, Luzin, was stationed. Luzin was shocked to see his wife's condition. From that moment on, Zhenya was specially trained to become part of the Soviet military, with one main goal, which was to demand justice for the death of her family. Returning to the present, Rita was seen walking alone in the forest. In the same place, an old man was riding a bicycle and then stopped for a moment to urinate. Not long afterward, 2 Nazi soldiers suddenly appeared, pointed their weapons, and immediately killed him. Rita, who was not far from the location, heard the sound. Rita then saw the presence of the 2 enemy soldiers and immediately hid in a gap between the rocks while observing the direction of their movement. After the situation felt safe, Rita ran back to the village and reported the incident to Vascov. Rita explained that there were 2 German soldiers wandering around wearing camouflage jackets. Hearing the report, Vascov immediately ordered Rita to gather the troops, while Vascov himself contacted his superior to request further instructions. Vascov then received an order to hunt the enemy soldiers in the forest. He studied the map and concluded that they were most likely heading toward the railway line. Vascov then gathered the entire unit and explained the operation plan to capture the two enemies. Rita was asked to choose 4 female soldiers considered the most competent. Rita called Zhenya and Galia. However, before determining the team, Vascov wanted to ensure their shooting abilities, so he also made his own selections. At first, Vascov still doubted their abilities. Liza then volunteered and stated that since childhood, she had been accustomed to shooting. Vascov still needed one more person, especially someone who could speak German. Sonia then stepped forward and explained that she mastered several foreign languages. Finally, 5 female soldiers were selected, and they began to prepare. At the base, Vascov was somewhat annoyed because some of them were not yet accustomed to wearing military boots, causing their feet to blister. He explained that the boots were not suitable for the terrain they would pass through, so they had to take good care of their feet. Vascov then approached Sonia, who was known to be quiet. Vascov asked whether Sonia came from a city, and Sonia answered that she did. The question made Sonia remember her past. The scene shifts to a flashback in 1,940 inches is a Soviet city. Sonia was seen parting with her mother to pursue military education. At that time, Sonia fell in love with a young man who was also part of the Soviet army. However, her lover later received a call to duty to the battlefield and eventually died. Returning to the present, Vascov and his unit looked for a way to create a simple communication code during their journey. Because the women did not yet have a special communication system, Vascov decided to use the imitation of a duck sound as a signal to exchange information. After that, they began moving through the forest. During the journey, Vascov explained that the German troops most likely only knew one route in that region and would most likely head toward a lake about 40 kilometers away. Because Vascov knew a secret path, his team could arrive earlier to intercept them. They stopped briefly, and Vascov asked about the condition of Sonia's family. Sonia explained that she did not know the fate of her family. Sonia was worried because they were Jewish and might have become victims of the massacre carried out by German troops. Even so, Sonia still held hope that her family might still be alive. Vascov then asked Sonia to try the duck sound code that had been agreed upon. When Sonia did it, all the soldiers immediately gathered in a state of readiness. Vascov ordered them to report any suspicious signs. At first, there were no significant reports until Liza conveyed her observation. Liza explained that Liza saw dew among the grass that had already dried. That indicated that the place had just been passed through or used as a stopping point. Vascov felt satisfied with the finding and praised Liza's attentiveness, then immediately invited the team to continue their journey. They then had to pass through a suction mud swamp. For that purpose, they prepared wooden logs as footholds. The soldiers lined up and slowly entered the muddy area. Vascov kept reminding them not to stop walking so they would not be pulled down. However, Galia suddenly stopped because her boot came off. Not long afterward, one of them was almost pulled into the mud, causing the situation to become panicked. The soldiers immediately extended wooden logs to one another and helped pull while continuing to move. After passing through the tense moment, they finally managed to cross safely. The journey continued until Vascov and his unit climbed a cliff and rested near a waterfall. The women took the opportunity to clean the mud from their bodies. Meanwhile, Vascov made new footwear for Galia from cloth so she could continue the journey safely. After everything was finished, Galia expressed her gratitude for the help. Some of the other soldiers instead began teasing Vascov and behaving excessively. Seeing that their behavior was starting to lose focus, Vascov immediately ordered the entire team to prepare and continue the journey. Sometime later, they finally arrived at the lake that was estimated to be the only route the German soldiers would pass. Vascov explained that behind the mountain there was another lake, and the German troops would most likely move between the two lakes toward the Soviet railway line. The enemy's objective was clear, which was to destroy the railway line. Therefore, Vascov immediately ordered his unit to find large rocks that could be used as combat positions as well as protection. They descended to the edge of the lake and began arranging strategic positions for the ambush. Each female soldier took the position that had been determined and prepared to carry out her respective task according to the orders. Toward evening, Vascov stood guard with Rita. However, as time passed, they still did not see any signs of the German soldiers' arrival. Rita believed that the enemy was most likely still resting. Based on her earlier observation, the 2 German soldiers she had seen appeared to be inexperienced and unfamiliar with the terrain of the region. That opinion made Vascov slightly relax the situation and allow some soldiers to rest. Vascov then approached Liza and assigned her to watch the bush area. After that, Vascov went around approaching the other soldiers to give additional instructions. At that moment, he saw that Galia appeared to be ill. Without hesitation, Vascov gave her a small amount of alcohol as an emergency remedy. At first, Galia refused because she considered it not to be medicine and even said that her mother was a doctor. However, Vascov emphasized that in that place, there was no one who could help them except themselves, and the conditions of war did not offer many choices. Hearing that explanation, Galia finally agreed to drink it. The situation made Galia remember her childhood when her mother was kidnapped by German troops. Since then, Galia had been raised in an orphanage until she reached adolescence. The next morning, Vascov heard suspicious movement. Their suspicion proved correct. The German troops finally passed along the lake route. However, the reality they saw was far more dangerous than the initial estimate. The number of German soldiers reached 16 men with full weaponry, not just 2 as previously suspected. Because they were outnumbered, Vascov immediately made a quick decision. Vascov ordered Liza to return to the village and report the situation so that additional reinforcements could be sent immediately from the headquarters. Liza agreed to the order and immediately ran toward the village. Meanwhile, Vascov and the other 4 soldiers had to find a way to slow the enemy's movement. Vascov explained that the camouflage clothing used by the German troops indicated that they were carrying out a stealth infiltration mission, not an open attack. That gave an opportunity for Vascov and his team to disguise themselves as civilians in order to hinder their movement. The female soldiers then disguised themselves as local woodcutters and began cutting down several trees around the area. Some German soldiers stopped to observe their activities, while others prepared to cross the river toward the supply direction. Seeing the situation, Vascov intended to shoot. However, Rita stopped him and immediately acted as a village girl who was at the river. The German soldiers then stopped their steps and continued observing from a distance. Vascov also disguised himself as a village resident. Their disguise eventually succeeded in making the German troops believe that they were only local residents. After no longer feeling suspicious, the German troops continued their journey and quietly left the location. Vascov and the female soldiers felt relieved because they had managed to pass through the dangerous situation without a direct clash. However, they realized that the next step depended entirely on Liza. If Liza managed to reach the village quickly, reinforcements would arrive soon. If not, they would have to face the situation alone. The scene then shows Liza continuing to run until she arrived at the swamp area. Now, she had to struggle alone to cross the swamp because the success of their mission depended entirely on her. Meanwhile, Vascov and the others continued to follow the enemy's tracks into the forest. From the top of a cliff, Vascov and Rita saw the German troops resting while eating. From that observation, Vascov concluded that they would most likely spend the night in the forest. Vascov then called the female soldiers to recheck their supplies. At that moment, he realized that his cigarettes had been left near the river. Vascov admitted that he really needed those cigarettes. Hearing that, Sonia immediately volunteered and ran to retrieve them. However, in the middle of the journey, Sonia was suddenly attacked and stabbed by a German soldier. Her scream was heard by Vascov, who then invited Genya to check the situation. At the location, they found Sonia's body, already dead. Not far from there, they saw 2 German soldiers walking. Vascov and Genya immediately formed a plan. Genya would distract them by throwing a stone, while Vascov attacked from behind. The plan went as expected. Vascov succeeded in disabling one enemy, but the second soldier put up strong resistance until Vascov was cornered. In a critical moment, Genya came from behind and managed to bring down the enemy. Both of them finally survived. After the incident, Genya could not hold herself and vomited because she was not accustomed to seeing blood. Vascov calmed her and said that such a reaction was normal, even for experienced soldiers. After the situation was safe, Vascov gathered all the female soldiers to remember Sonia. Sadness surrounded them. Vascov promised that if the war ended, Vascov would build a monument to honor Sonia's sacrifice. Vascov then took clothing from Sonia's body to keep as equipment that could still be used. However, Galia refused the decision and asked that the body be treated properly. Vascov explained that they were in an emergency situation and had to make use of everything available. Galia continued to object and again said that her mother was a doctor. Rita, who had long heard that story, finally said firmly that Galia had actually never known her mother because she had been raised in an orphanage. Those words made Galia cry, realizing the truth that she had been hiding all this time. They then continued their journey quickly because the German troops already knew their presence. Not long afterward, Vascov confronted the German troops directly and immediately threw a grenade. The explosion brought down many enemies. A gunfight occurred until the German troops eventually retreated because several of them were wounded. After the battle, the women were disappointed because Galia had not fired a single shot. For them, Galia's fear had become a burden. However, Vascov did not scold her. Instead, he invited Galia to carry out a mission with him. The group was then divided into two. Vascov went with Galia, while the others moved separately. During the journey, Vascov and Galia found the body of a German soldier who appeared to have been killed by his own comrade. Vascov explained that in the German army, soldiers considered a burden could be killed by their own group. The explanation made Galia increasingly understand the harsh reality of war. Not long afterward, they saw German troops passing by. Vascov immediately pulled Galia to hide. Their position was actually safe, but Galia, overwhelmed by fear, suddenly came out of hiding while shouting for her mother. The German soldiers immediately shot her until she died. Seeing this, Vascov returned fire, but the number of enemies was too great, so Vascov was forced to retreat and look for a chance to escape. A chase occurred until Vascov finally threw himself into a swamp. The German troops fired from above and assumed that Vascov had died, then left the place. Vascov, who was still alive, struggled to cross the swamp with great difficulty before eventually fainting. The next day, he woke up and saw Liza's stick and uniform stuck on the surface of the swamp. From that, he realized that Liza had not succeeded in crossing the swamp. Vascov cried, remembering how young and innocent the female soldiers were who had fallen under his command. Now Vascov had to fight alone. He began hunting the German soldiers one by one, silently. After that, he returned to the original location by the river and finally met Zhenya and Rita again. There, Vascov informed them that they had lost 3 soldiers. Galia had fallen in the gunfight, while Liza had died in the swamp. Their ammunition supplies were also very limited, and even the remaining grenades did not function. Even so, Zhenya and Rita continued to encourage him and believed that they still had a chance. The 3 of them then prepared in their respective positions. They realized that the chance of survival was very small because the German troops would soon arrive in large numbers. Vascov ordered them to hold their ground until the end. When the enemy appeared, they immediately opened fire. A fierce gunfight followed. The German troops, far more numerous, began spreading out and surrounding their position. Rita was shot in the shoulder. Then an explosive device was thrown toward her. The explosion made Rita's wound extremely severe. Vascov immediately approached to help her. Meanwhile, Zhenya bravely lured the German troops away toward the forest. The enemy immediately chased her. The chase ended at the edge of a cliff, where Zhenya was eventually shot, fell, and was killed. On the other side, Vascov was unable to save Rita because her injuries were too severe. She could only wait for death. Vascov handed a pistol to her for protection, while he would try to go to the village to seek help. Before they parted, Rita said that she had a child and asked Vascov to take care of the child. Vascov promised that he would do so. He kissed Rita before leaving. A few steps after Vascov left the place, the sound of a gunshot was heard, indicating that Rita had ended her life so that she would not fall into the enemy's hands. Vascov continued walking until he found German troops resting in the middle of the forest. When they were careless, Vascov attacked and shot at them until only 3 soldiers remained, who eventually surrendered. Vascov captured them alive and took them toward the village. During the journey, when they arrived at the river, Vascov almost fainted because of the wounds he had suffered. Fortunately, additional Soviet troops arrived just in time and immediately evacuated them. Vascov eventually became the only survivor of that team. Their struggle received recognition, and Rita's child was later cared for by the village with a guarantee of safety. However, Vascov's duty had not yet ended. New female troops were sent to the village and once again placed under his command. Their presence made Vascov continually remember the sacrifice of the previous soldiers who had fought bravely despite their limited experience and equipment. At that point, the story ends.